Good morning, everyone. I'm Steve Morgan, Head of Policy and Infrastructure at RECOUP. Welcome to the penultimate webinar today of our series of 5 webinars that looked at the impacts of plastic on the plastic value chain in the next few years. Thank you for everyone for taking the time today to join us. This particular webinar is on the release and the findings of our 2021 version of our Household Plastics Collection Survey. This webinar is actually scheduled for 1 hour, but there'll be some presentations from myself, from my colleagues, Tom Macbeth and Laura Hutchings, and some time for some questions at the end. And if we do finish early, obviously, then we can give some time back to you in your busy schedules that you have. Just a few words on housekeeping. Please don't use the chat function or virtually raise your hand, as we won't be monitoring these during this session. And if you have a question, just put the question into the Q&A section, a function which can be found at the bottom of your screens if you're on a PC or a laptop, and we'll pick these up after the presentations are finished. Also, just to confirm that only our speakers will have access to be on, and the videos will be on as well when we're speaking, and the webinar is actually being recorded as well for others to view after the webinar is completed. The slides and the recording will be made available to you through an email. And also, if you look at the other webinars in the series, they'll be available also on the RECOUP website. After this webinar is finished, you'll be able to download the report, the final report, if you're a member. All you need to do is log in and go to Key Reference Information and Literature. So if you log in, you'll see a list on the left, and you'll be able to download the report from there. And if you're not a member, you'll be able to have access to the data summary, which is through the, if you go onto the RECOUP website, you'll see resources section, and RECOUP reports will be easily to find. Sorry, just moving slides on. Just a few words about RECOUP for those of you who are maybe not aware. We started about 30 years ago as a small 3-year project, and it's developed quite substantially since then. We've now got over 160 members going across the plastics value chain, from brands, retailers, waste management providers, local authorities, recyclers and academia, a whole range of different companies. There are 4 main areas of our activities. So first is policy and infrastructure, which is where myself, Tom and Laura sit, packaging, recycling and design, sustainability and circularity, and also communication and engagement to the citizens. So under all of these, there's a whole raft of activities that take place, and we produce a vast array of reports and information, and also take place in a lot of activities with government, policyholders, makers, and also the citizens as well. If you want to find out anything more about RECOUP, you can go to our website and download our brochure. Just a few words about the series of webinars. As mentioned before, this is the penultimate one of five webinars. Previous ones started to take place last week, the first one being on plastic packaging recycling markets, the future of how these will develop over time. Then there was also one on consumer behavior in relation to plastic packaging and behavior change. One yesterday focused on circularity and sustainability in complex sectors. Obviously, we got the one today, and then tomorrow we'll be looking at plastic film recycling opportunities. Obviously, that's a major area for the UK to tackle. Okay, just a few words about the Plastics Collection Survey. It's actually been running since 1994, when 425 tonnes were collected from plastic bring schemes that are found in supermarkets and in areas where people can actually go out of their home to recycle. This has allowed us to actually build up quite a substantial bit of lots of information. So, for example, one of the stats we've regularly put into the survey report is the number of bottles recycled. So there's actually been over 100 billion plastic bottles recycled since 1994. All the local authorities in the UK are surveyed in an online questionnaire. And We're able today, obviously, to give you the findings of the report. If you're a member, you'll be able to have access to the full report, and if you're not a member, you'll have access to a data summary and press release as well. But just ahead of this year's report, there's obviously been substantial impacts on the industry. We've had to cope with the unique challenges faced in 2020, both from the COVID-19 and Brexit. There's been changes around the export of plastic packaging for recycling. There's wider issues around waste crime, and there's obviously a huge amount of legislative changes that are taking place. And actually, looking back at last weekend, there was an article in the Times, and it actually used our graph, as we call it. So this tracks the plastic collection changes from 1994 right the way through to last year. So this article was actually focusing on how we can fix Britain's woeful recycling record. Depending on who you talk to, then actually what we've got is quite a good success story here in terms of what's happened over the years. But obviously, you'll find out as we talk today, there's a lot more that can be done. So we're in a period of extensive policy changes in the UK, as I'm sure you're all aware. It feels like it's a very, very long consultation season. We thought this consultation season would be around for about a year last year, but it's going to continue for some time to come. So the main whirlpool is centered around 4 separate different policy changes to do with plastic packaging. One is to do with extended producer responsibility. So it's the reform of the UK packaging producer responsibility system. Another is around deposit return schemes, both in England, Wales, Northern Ireland, and also in Scotland. There's another one around the plastic packaging tax. And there's actually a live consultation ongoing at the moment around the secondary legislation. Consistent recycling collections for England. And we've just started a consultation around single-use plastics for England. There's also a consultation running as well in Northern Ireland. And you might have seen throughout the year, there's been a number of changes regarding what plastic packaging can be exported for recycling through the Basel Convention, and also a lot of changing positions as well in terms of which countries want to accept waste from other countries and how that's managed. There was also a very interesting consultation that ran from the Competition and Markets Authority on businesses making environmental claims to promote or sell their goods or services. So it's really a wide-ranging area of consultations. And what's going to happen is with these, they're going to be like thrown together in a very, very short space of time. And how they land after that is going to be very, very interesting to see. We're going to have the tax implemented from 2022. EPR is probably going to take place in 2024 and 25. So you're going to get these gaps. So it's going to be it could be quite a clunky change, but what we do and how we react to this in the next 2 or 3 years is going to be very, very important to how we map out our future policy for how we manage recycling and waste for the next 20 to 25 years. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is pass you across to Tom and to Laura, who will give you some of the findings from this year's survey.
Thanks, Steve. Yep, just to run through a bit of background to this year's survey, but also some of the key figures and the key details. So back in April, we sent out our survey, our online questionnaire, to all 379 of the local authorities in the UK, as well as the waste partnerships and county councils that also manage waste, and asked a series of questions about the various elements relating to recycling, specifically household plastic collections. This year, the questions were around the quantities of plastic collected, as they are every year, the reject rates, contamination levels, and also the views on legislation, future spending, known plans about investments in infrastructure, export quantities, and the general impact of COVID-19 as well. This year, we used a new platform to send out the survey. So we sent it through SurveyMonkey in an attempt to make it simpler and easier to fill out and also more familiar, which hopefully worked. And despite all the challenges of 2020, particularly around COVID-19, we got a good response rate of around 67%. On top of the survey itself, on top of the questionnaires, we checked all local authority websites to get an understanding of their messages to residents and their provision for collection at curbside. So this relates to whether they collect plastic bottles, pot stubs and trays, films and other materials as well, like drinks cartons and polystyrene. The frequency of collection, the container types, and further messages on how citizens should present their recycling. So whether lids are on bottles, lids are off bottles, whether they say to wash, squash and rinse trays, whether polymer codes are being used to communicate, and that kind of messaging. For areas where we weren't able to get the information or we didn't get responses to the survey, we have calculated data based on responses from similar or other local authorities in combination with household numbers, population and reflective information from previous years where it appears to be relevant. We also have access to other data sources, so we've used some information from the Environment Agency's National Packaging Waste Database and also Waste Data Flow. For the latter, we receive limited separated data from as an external organisation rather than a local authority. As such, we generally are reporting based on the responses to the survey when it comes to tonnages and quantities of material. Additionally to those sources of information, we have had to use external data around, for example, material that's placed on the market. So as with previous years, we've used Valpak's placed on the market figures for plastic packaging. And their most recent survey, the COVID impact reports, with some further detail that was gone into this year. The household figures for calculating populations and the population of the devolved nations are from the 2011 census by the Office of National Statistics. And we have some information relating to yield losses and reject rates that have come from a combination of industry partners and RECOUP members, as well as the waste management companies and the councils themselves. All of those things combined have given us the data that we've got in the survey this year. Next slide, please, Steve. Yep, so the service provision, as mentioned, this is largely taken from the local authority websites. Since late 2019, so this was in last year's survey as well, all UK local authorities are offering a curbside collection for plastic bottles. As with previous years as well, the provision for plastic pot stubs and trays has increased, so we're now looking at 87% of local authorities collecting them. And plastic film is on the decrease again, and that's for the 4th year in a row. So it's 13% of local authorities collect film at the curbside for recycling. Some of these percentages, it is worth noting, are slightly different proportions to last year because there are less local authorities, so there's 379 in total. The last few years, we've also looked at the curbside provision for other items, so specifically plastic plant pots, as they create some unique challenges in terms of the potential to be contaminated by organics. And there is still a 12% provision rate from local authorities who actively communicate collecting them. This was 14% in 2019. We've also looked at the non-curbside collection of household plastics. So this includes household waste recycling centres, which may collect plastic bottles, or it may collect other types of packaging, such as expanded polystyrene, or it may collect other plastics, such as children's toys and other hard plastic items that are not normally recycled at the curbside. These have been significantly, household waste centres, sorry, have been significantly disrupted in the last 18 months or so. For example, believe that all of them were closed at some point in the early stages of the pandemic. But on the other hand, we've seen growth in other collection schemes. So retailers collecting plastic film and other what they term hard to recycle plastics has seen some growth in the last year. Aside from the closures, local authorities reported that under normal pre-COVID conditions, 64% of them, their household waste recycling centres collect plastics in some form separately for recycling. 73% of these were for plastic bottles, whilst 57% were for hard plastics and 31% for other plastic packaging. Next slide, please, Steve. In last year's survey, we began looking at other variables in terms of collection types and frequency of collection, and we've done the same this year. It's a particular interest for, particularly for England at the moment, with the consistent collection consultation that DEFRA has held earlier this year, though that's looking largely at the standardising of a set list of materials. Some of our findings you can see on the slides. The majority of UK local authorities deliver a fortnightly collection service for recyclables, although there is a significant number that do offer weekly collections and some that are less frequent. These tend to be, the weekly collections in particular tend to be more densely populated area where space and storage may be an issue. We see a 50-50, almost exact 50-50 split on the number of local authorities who collect recycling as dry mixed recyclables and those who collect in some form of source separate manner. So this is most commonly glass or paper and card that is separated from the general recycling streams at the point of disposal. The most commonly used units are steel wheel bins. 75% of the local authorities use them, although there are some variations in individual areas. So in inner cities, whilst they may use bins predominantly, there may be high-rise flats that use bags instead, again, because of space issues. And the most common bin colour is blue. In terms of consistency, it highlights again how there is significant sort of variation from one council or one local authority area to another. So in one place, a blue bin might be general waste, in another it may be recycling. And of course, we couldn't ignore the impact of COVID-19 on collection services. So 78% of local authorities reported a noticeable impact on their collection services due to the pandemic. And 59% of these said that their dry mixed recycling or their plastic recycling collections were specifically affected. This was usually as a result of staffing shortages and wasn't necessarily restricted to any particular time of the year in 2020 or indeed into 2021. Furthermore, on-the-go recycling schemes have been hugely impacted, but this is harder to measure data as to whether it is whether it's due to their use or whether it's due to their collection and where this material has ultimately been captured and whether it's gone in with general waste. Next slide, please, Steve. Yep, just going back to the placed on the market figures. So we've used, as mentioned before, we've used Valpak's COVID impact reports as the primary source of data for material placed on the market. So this is 1,412,000 tonnes of consumer plastic packaging placed on the UK market. And this breaks down as 637,000 tonnes of bottles, 460,000 tonnes of pot stubs and trays, and 309,000 tonnes of plastic film. We have seen some changes to these figures in the last couple of years, largely again due to the impact of COVID. And these figures are slightly down on the overall tonnage for 2019 in terms of what's been placed on the market. We've also seen switches in the proportions within the different formats. So for example, 2020, we saw a greater use of HDPE bottles over PET bottles due to the changes in consumer behaviour and requirements, increased time at home, less time on the go. Next slide, please, Steve. So the collection performance for local authorities, we see a total collection of household plastic packaging of 584,000 tonnes, which is 24,000 tonnes more than in 2019, or a 4% increase when compared like for like. And as can be seen on this slide, the gradual trend of increasing in material collected it continues to grow at a steady rate. Next slide, please, Steve. And that 584,000 tonnes is made up of the figures on the slide here. So 390,000 tonnes of plastic bottles, 170,000 tonnes of plastic pot stubs and trays, and 25,000 tonnes of film. This is curbside material as well as an amount of non-curbside material, so items, these formats that are disposed of at household waste centres and also other bring schemes. All the material quantities have increased on 2019, so 13,000 tonnes more of bottles, 9,000 more of pot stubs and trays, 3,000 more of film. And film in particular is noteworthy as the provision for it has actually gone down. So there's less local authorities collecting it, but we're seeing more material. This is partly due to the increase in other collection schemes, such as the front of store schemes by retailers. And also a certain amount of it is known to be captured along with pot stubs and trays. Just going back to bottles, the 61% collection rate for plastic bottles overall This breaks down as 78% collection for natural HDPE, so that's milk bottles, and similar, 75% for PET drinks bottles, and then 45% for non-drinks bottles. Pot stubs and trays is a 36% collection rate, and film is 8%. That again highlights the significant amount of material that's still able to be captured for recycling, particularly if plastic film is to be included in curbside schemes as part of the consistent collections in England legislation. Next slide, please, Steve. So just to build from that overall figure, so 584,000 tonnes were collected in 2020 for recycling, but this leaves 828,000 tonnes not collected and therefore likely going to landfill or for energy recovery. So there's a huge amount of material there. And also, as you can see on the slide, the overall collection rate is 41% for those formats, plastic packaging and post-consumer plastic packaging. Next slide, please, Steve. Just to give some context to the volumes of materials, so if we're to look at the amount placed on the market, the amount collected in comparison to how many households there are in the UK, we can see that there's around 21 kilograms of plastic packaging being recycled per household, when in fact there's 51 kilograms being consumed per household. Bottles is 14 to 23, so significantly higher than the pot stubs and trays and film fraction. But again, we see a huge amount of potential in being able to capture that material, particularly the film fraction as consistent collections is coming in. Next slide, please. One of the other figures we mentioned originally was around the recycled plastic markets. So we've spoken with the Environment Agency and also in response to the survey to find out where the majority of material was being sent to. So for 2020, the National Packaging Waste Database reported the overall recycling figure was 1,174,000 tonnes of plastic packaging declared for recycling, and around 56% of this, around 60% of this was exported for recycling. So that's around 688,000 tonnes. And 41% recycled domestically, which is a drop on previous years. So there is more material being recycled in the UK in 2020 than 2019. And that trend seems to have continued into 2021 as well. The destinations have remained largely consistent. So although we've seen some legislative changes for imports into Turkey in particular, we see that up until March this year at least, and indeed going forwards, the majority of our material is still being sent to Turkey. And you can see on the right there, it is a bit small on the slides, but the Turkey makes up the majority of the non-EU OECD fraction. The largest importer of our plastic recycling is still the EU, which, subject to legislative changes in the Basel Convention at the moment, there is talk of the EU's policy on contamination limits for green list waste. So intra-EU, that currently sits at 6% and is due to sit at 6% contamination allowance, whereas OECD countries, that contamination allowance could be as low as 2%. So depending on how the UK is defined by the EU in that respect, it looks as though that the UK will be considered an OECD country, and therefore the green list waste requirement will be 2% contamination. And I'll hand over to Laura now to talk about the communication slide.
Thank you, Tom. So as Tom mentioned, in the methodology for our service provision, we conducted research by visiting all the local authority websites. And when we did this, we investigated the messaging around how recyclable plastics should be presented. And we found that this messaging varies widely across the UK. There are many advantages to squashing, emptying, washing and reattaching lids, in that it gives the lids the best chance to be recycled, it reduces the volume of the item, and it reduces risks of contaminating other recyclables. However, despite this, we found that only 28% of local authorities are advising to leave lids on bottles, 46% are advising to flatten or squash, 73% are advising to empty, rinse or wash. We also found that 5% of local authorities are still using polymer codes in their communications, and this can cause confusion as some packaging actually doesn't display a code. Steve, next slide, please. Pledge to Recycle Plastics is RECOUP's citizen behaviour initiative, and it works to reduce consumer confusion around plastics recycling. Pledge to Recycle Plastics alongside RECOUP are project leads in a project that's first of its kind and it's in industry-led research, and it's named Kent Understanding Plastics Live Lab. This project is a UK Innovate SSPP funded project, and it aims to understand the connection between citizen communications and plastics recycling. We're working with 13 local authorities across Kent and their waste management companies, and this will connect with 1.5 million people, around 673,000 households. The project is currently live and it's running for 12 months from July 2021 to July 2022, and it's split into 3 phases, with phase 1 and 2 now complete and phase 3 due to be completed in February 2022. Across these phases, there's various methods of communication, including leaflets, shopper engagements, school competitions, local influencers, recycling wheels, and social media. All these communication methods are pre-agreed with all Kent councils alongside their waste management companies Viridor and Veolia, and they use Pledge to Recycle Plastics Cutting the Confusion resource pack, and they're aligned with RAP's Plastic Pact and Recycle Now messaging. As part of the project, collected tonnages and contamination data will be analysed, both historical and over the 3 phases, to identify any changes in citizen behaviour. There's also an online survey which is available nationwide, and it's looking at citizen knowledge and recycling actions for popular plastic packaging formats. This will be used to compare Kent behaviour over the 3 phases, as well as historically and against the rest of the UK. From the project, it's hoped that the insights will provide evidence to support future plastics recycling engagement strategies. And now I'll pass back over to Steve.
Thanks, Laura. There's just a few other areas which I thought would be useful to cover from what we found in our findings. One is around plastic waste crime, particularly around litter and fly tipping. One of the questions we asked was around whether fly tipping is a greater issue than litter. And it looks like that's starting to increase. So 70% to 3% of local authorities actually reporting fly tipping was a greater problem. That's something which we're looking into in a greater level, because obviously with extended producer responsibility, looking at full net costs of the packaging placed onto the market, and part of that is could be litter cleanup. There's a lot of potentially issues here regarding packaging being mixed up with other materials. This is an interesting one. Those who shared an opinion on this, 55% predominantly felt their areas were actually free of litter, and 45% reported heavy or widespread distribution of litter. So actually we've got quite a split here in terms of those that feel they've been obviously heavily impacted by waste on their streets and in their local natural environments, and others that don't. So that's another area to try and pick and go further into over the next year, I think. 43% of local authorities reported an increase in litter and fly tipping in 2020. And of those who actually saw that increase, 65% thought there'd be as a direct result of the COVID-19 pandemic. So that's quite a stark statistic to look at, I think, in terms of how we move forward in the UK. In terms of plastic waste crime, in 2021, the Environment Agency released their waste crime summary data, which highlighted the extent of the challenges when it comes to illegal operations in the UK. The EA itself hasn't been able to conduct the same level of checks as it has been in previous years due to site access and staffing issues regarding the pandemic. But nonetheless, significant quantities of material are being stopped from being illegally exported and also being intercepted before they obviously find their way into natural environments and wildlife. Whilst down on previous years due to these challenges, it was reported that there was almost 500 illegal active waste sites were identified, while there are over 700 instances of illegal activity being stopped. So the Environment Agency are continuing to work hard on this, both in terms of on the domestic level and also reducing the amount of potentially illegally transferred waste that might be exported for recycling or try to be exported for recycling. Just for your information, you might have heard of this before, but the RECOUP are actually chairs of a scheme called the Waste Compliance Task Force, or otherwise known as WACT, launched in 2020. It's actually a forum for collaborative cross-sector working, which hopes to improve understanding of the compliance of waste regulations and more importantly, I think, engage with environmental regulators to support more effective ways to prevent and tackle waste crime. There's actually a meeting taking place tomorrow, so if you want to find out more about that, please get in touch with us. With significant amounts of plastic packaging being exported for recycling each year, the infrastructure within the UK to handle that material is really getting more important. So a well-designed and funded EPR scheme should provide the necessary funding and infrastructure to back that up and help the UK in its ambitions. We asked in the survey this year, we actually asked local authorities whether they were planning to build or expand their infrastructure. And 71 local authorities came back to us and confirmed that was the case. And they also identified which areas they were looking at as well. So this ranged from energy waste facilities, building and sorting facilities, expanding their service provision through household waste recycling centres, and also recovering recycling material from general waste as well. When they were asked how they would prioritise spending, 36% actually ranked infrastructure and capacity as their #1 choice. So this is handling material and sorting material, as opposed to the collection of it, maybe from curbside schemes. Also, in terms of those collection schemes as well, how that's communicated to the consumer. So that's quite a stark reality there, I think, in terms of the actual infrastructure is needed ahead of the communications that's obviously still important to deliver. But as we go on, other technologies will come to the fore. So as I'm sure you're aware, chemical recycling capabilities in the UK is going to increase quite substantially. And I think the local authority and waste management infrastructure to feed those facilities will need to adapt to the feedstock requirements that's needed. So we're talking about mechanical recycling, and we're talking about non-mechanical recycling as well. One thing we looked at in the survey this year is how the current packaging producer responsibility system is funding waste management and recycling in the UK. So this is based actually on the price of a packaging recovery note, or PRN, and this price goes up and down depending on demand. So if you look at the left-hand side of the slide, in 2006 it was actually £12. PRN was £12. In 2019, the average price actually rose to £306. So on this basis, it's almost impossible to have any sort of confidence in the financial investment strategy that's needed for the UK. How can you plan when this investment every year changes quite dramatically? Also in the report, we've actually got a very good piece from Recycling Insights. This is an article written by Paul Sanderson, and it looks at the plastic recycling markets over the past year, but it also actually goes into detail in terms of the PRN prices in 2021. So again, in November 2020, the price was something like £5 for a PRN. It went up to over £150 and it's back down again. So that really, again, highlights the issues. And as we make a transition to extended producer responsibility, I understand it's the importance is highlighted about consistent and stable funding streams. So going back to the continuing consultation season I mentioned earlier on, it's really getting down to a crunch time for plastic recycling, both for decision makers and industry, to ensure that the policies can be implemented on time and effectively in order to meet our environmental goals and also maintain public support. Evidence should be central as we navigate this time of change with policymakers and to contribute to well-informed policy for the future. And this is where the RECOUP survey actually has quite a good importance in terms of their understanding about how plastic recycling is performing in the UK, and also where our best efforts can be made in the future as well. So if you want to download the survey, you can go to our website. If you have any problems with that, please let us know and get in touch. And we've got a bit of time now for questions. I'm just picking up some from what was posted earlier on. I'll take them in turn. One of them is, whilst consistency policy direction is not known, and won't come through for a few years. Is the RECOUP survey in recent years seeing a general increase or decrease in collection systems consistency? Excepting obviously some areas like Wales have been more aligned for a number of years. Tom, that might be a good one for you to respond to.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, anecdotally, we see the same sort of inconsistencies from year to year. So it is hard to measure sort of the different things, but the inconsistencies around things like language that's being used as well, the type of collection units, and of course the materials. So since the collection of pots, tubs and trays is going up, and the collection of film, or the provision for the collection of film, sorry, is going down, the material appears to be moving towards more of a consistent set from one local authority to another. But in terms of the language used and the way that it's communicated to citizens, I don't believe so. No.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Tom. I mean, we obviously in 2019 we hit 100% of local authorities providing curbside collection for plastic bottles. That's been gradually creeping up for years. Pots, tubs and trays has been gradually creeping up for a number of years as well. So 87% collect pots and trays from curbside. But it's plastic films are the real issue, which leads me on to a question from Patrick from Smurfit Kappa. Why is plastic film collection decreasing? It just reflects the markets as they stand. If there's something valuable in the recycling stream, and it's got a value at the end of it, when it's been sorted, it will have the necessary infrastructure in place to recover that material and obviously provide it into the end markets that exist. But plastic film recycling for household material, not commercial material, for household material, it's very much in its infancy at the moment in the UK. And in the EPR consultation, the plan was to increase collections so all local authorities will be collecting plastic film as part of their curbside collection from 2027-28, also for businesses by 2025-26, I think. So we're going to be having a period of transition where we've seen this figure drop for collections of recycling of plastic film, but they will go up again. And there's a lot of activity taking place now, and will be in the next coming couple of years as well, to reconfigure MRFs to how they can collect the material and recover it, collection vehicles as well, and also developing the end markets that are actually essential component. Chemical recycling and mechanical recycling will both have a strong impact on that, I think. Another question, why does the place in the market data keep changing as an impact on collection rates? This can't just be down to the pandemic. That's absolutely right. So the plastic packaging that's placed in the market does change every year. There's excellent reports that come through from Velpac and their Plasflow reports looking at flows of materials. And that's what we use as the most robust set of data set we can use. However, that's often estimates. So there is changes, there is reports available, obviously retrospectively, of how much packaging was used, and these will change every year. I mean, there was quite substantial changes in the pandemic. So, for example, the smaller sort of PET drinks bottles, there was less of them because people were at home more, they were out and about less, and of the bigger 2-litre bottles of soft drinks were actually more in use. So there will be changes. It was highlighted during the pandemic, but year on year, packaging will be scrutinised in terms of recyclability, and that would also affect the volumes that are placed onto the market as well. Just picking up a few more questions here. Do you know how many councils are actually collecting films in flexibles now? I recall it was previously 55. Tom and Laura, have you got that exact figure?
Yeah, it's 49, but it's not an exact science in terms of some of them will communicate that they collect things like carrier bags, but not bubble wrap. Laura tells me it's 20 collect carrier bags only, 49 in total collect some or communicate that they collect some kind of film at the curbside for recycling.
We've had another question here about why the collection of flexibles is going down. I think we've covered that already. And I think it's, just to add to that, I think it'll be interesting to see how local authorities and waste management companies and the contracts behind their relationship shape up in the next two or 3 years, because the direction of travel is quite clear. Films will be collected universally, but equally so, I think there'll be some local authorities, waste management providers that want to progress as fast as they possibly can do to be ahead of the curve. And others might have restrictions placed on them where that's not maybe quite the case. Other question here from Libby Co. When do you think we will hear when the final materials must be collected by councils, in particular film? So the target dates to implement film collections from curbside were outlined in the EPR consultation. The last I heard is that the outcome of those consultations will be communicated in early 2022. So we will see what the lie of the land is at that point, and I'm sure there'll be further consultations as well before that actually dates, or those dates get agreed both for households and businesses. Another question is here is, how can we be in a situation where plastic pots, tubs and trays are still not 100% when producers are crying out for post-consumer recycling? Very pertinent question. So pots, tubs and trays are inherently valuable because they have the polypropylene fraction that's highly recyclable in that fraction. However, there's other fractions within that stream that are not, do not have the infrastructure in the UK to recycle them. PET trays being one. So whereas the value is there for parts of that stream, they're not there for others. And that's another area, like with plastic film, where infrastructure needs to develop to recover the fractions in maybe a higher quality format, and also develop the end markets as well to produce, maybe get pots, tubs, trays back into pots, tubs and trays, or into other applications. Another question here, do you make any estimates of how collection rates translate to actual recycling rates for plastic packaging? The levels of losses in MRFs and reprocessing? Obviously, that's quite a pertinent question. We're talking here within our plastics collection survey about collection. We're not talking about recycling. Tom and Laura, I think we do have some information on the estimates about those yield losses. If you're able to, do you have that in front of you at all?
Not in front of me, no. It was between 15 reject rates were between around 5% and 30%, I believe, reported by the local authorities.
Yeah, so that's contamination in there, the material that's collected for recycling. So what's collected, they're talking about 5 to 30% could actually well be contamination. Some of those loads will be accepted and counted as recycling. Others will not be accepted and they would be rejected. So they would go into energy recovery or landfill. But typically, yes, through the recycling process, through sorting and through reprocessing as well, there is material yield losses. There's some good information around this. We've actually do cover it in the survey. And the source of that information is the Valpac Plasflow report. So if you have any trouble downloading that, you can go to the Valpac website, or you can just talk to us and we'll let you know how to access that information.
Sorry, Steve, it was 13% average for reject rates between 1 and 40 was the range.
Here is why household collection performance of pots, tubs and trays and films is going up, whereas the history of local authority supervision for curbside recycling of plastics is going down. The collection rates for, let's say, pots, tubs and trays, they are going up year on year as new schemes that collect plastic pots and tubs and trays expand and become more successful. When a scheme is introduced, typically it starts at a very kind of flat lines a little bit. It goes up as people obviously recycle those items, and it drops a little bit. And as it becomes more well established and matures, then you get some sort of a sense of growth. And I think that's starting to happen now with pots, tubs and trays. Plastic film, as Tom mentioned earlier on, there's more and more retailers actually offering store collections for this material. And that's largely led to the increases that we've seen in this year's survey. There's also more film actually we found in the recycling stream than we originally anticipated. We started reporting on this a couple of years ago, and it's something I think we need to keep a very close eye on as time moves on. I think we're out of questions now. Thank you very much for all the questions that have come through. You'll be able to download again the full report if you log in as a member. And I've seen some messages there about those who want to join as members. If you send me an email to steve.morgan@recoup.org, I'll be happy to communicate with you. For those that are not members, if you just go to the RECOUP website, you'll see a resources tab and just go to RECOUP reports and you'll be able to download the data summary. There is a press release that's going to be made available as well. That press release is going to be released today. So hopefully we'll be seeing some coverage in the media. This is focusing very much around the legislative changes that are happening and how it's important to make use of the time we have over the next couple of years to develop well-designed systems and policy. Apart from that, thank you very much for your time today, and also to Tom and Laura for their time. We hope you find it useful. If there's any other information you'd like to discuss with us, please do get in contact. This webinar is about obviously sharing some of the key findings, but we're happy to discuss any aspects of the report. And apart from that, have a great day, everyone, and take care, and goodbye for now.